Cold calling is one of the most brutal parts of sales. Most of the time, people have no idea who you are, and then you have to convince them to take you up on your service or your product. And because of this, there's a lot of people who have tried cold calling and they say, hey, it doesn't work for me, or even worse, cold calling is dead. But in reality, cold calling actually does work. That is, if you have the right framework. And so in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can write a cold calling script and show you the exact 5-step process that I use for my own agency to cold call and start conversations with B2B companies. If you don't know me, my name is Isaac Wood. I'm the founder of levergrowth.io. We are an outbound sales agency. And over the last 3 years, we booked over 1,000 qualified sales appointments for ourselves and for our clients with our outbound process using cold email and cold calling. So we know a thing or two about turning cold prospects into qualified sales appointments. So I'm going to show you exactly how you can script your cold calls, meaning showing you exactly how you can call a B2B company that you want to work with that has no idea who you are and start that sales conversation. And by the end of this video, you're going to walk away with the exact methodology that I personally use to book calls for my agency and my clients. So what are we covering today? First, we'll cover the single most important part of any cold call, the first 5 seconds. Then we'll cover your 30-second commercial. This is your hook or the purpose of your call. Then we'll touch on pain point discovery and your call to action, bringing it all together. First things first. So the first 5 seconds. The most nerve-wracking and important part of any call is that first impression. The key is to stay confident, but don't sound like a used car salesman. The point of the first 5 seconds is to buy you time to deliver your pitch and do some basic discovery. This is always where the most hangups will occur no matter what. Even if you have the best pitch, you have the best first 5 seconds down, you're gonna get hung up on. It's the name of the game, just how it goes. But if you can nail this, you're gonna put yourself in a better position to actually get to that next step. So if you can get past this first section, you're in a great spot. To do this, you can't sound like every other person who's making a cold call trying to sell them something. You've got to create a pattern interrupt. What do I mean by that? The most important parts of the pattern interrupt are a strong, a consistent tone and pacing that's not overly bubbly or overly car salesman-y, right? Getting them consent to taking a little bit more time to explain why you called is also super, super essential here, and a big reason why people will actually hear you out in the next step, right? So here's an example script that you can use. You can apply this to your own situation. You say, hey name, this is your name. I'm from company. We haven't spoken before, and I'm calling you out of the blue, but I do have a well-researched reason why I'm calling. It'll take just 22 seconds to tell you why, and then you can let me know if it makes sense to keep talking. Does that sound fair? Right? This works because you are acknowledging their time and you're getting their consent to move on to the next step and explain why it's relevant. The key here, you're coming in cold. They don't know you, they don't like you, they don't trust you, and they certainly haven't been asked to be contacted by you. So you need to make sure that they're consenting. And so this is how you do that. And then you move on to the next step, which is your hook, right? So the hook or your 30-second commercial. The main purpose of your hook is to uncover your prospect's pain points. No deal ever closes if the prospect's not facing a pain, right? There's just too much friction of change without a real reason to take action. That's why you need to focus on validating their pain points as early as possible and do it as often as possible as well. And to do this, say something like, assuming they give you the consent, they say, yeah, sure. You respond, cool, thanks. So I'm calling from Lever Growth, my company, and we work with target customers. So people like you, agencies, B2B SaaS businesses, what have you. Typically, we'll work with companies like name your best case study that's relevant for one of 3 reasons. And then you go into the 3 reasons, starting with the most common reason, the second most common reason, and the third most common reason people actually start to work with you. And you can gather this data from previous sales calls, conversations with your actual customers, and feedback calls as well, right? But you want to just keep it very concise. You say, Reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. And you say, so name, with where you're at right now, is reason 1, reason 2, or reason 3 more relevant to you? Right? This gives them an option and puts them directly in the headspace of problem solving and wanting to get them to admit to some kind of a pain, right? If they're not facing that pain, they're not going to make any action. So make it really clear, very specific. So an example, we help companies book meetings on their calendar because they don't have time to prospect, they don't have the resources available internally from a headcount perspective, and they're not using the right tech, right? So those are 3 reasons. You can present that, and then the prospect will give you some more context into what they're actually facing in their exact situation right now. So at this point, your prospect will either agree that they have some kind of a pain that you'd mentioned, or they'll share which pain point is specifically most relevant to them. And if they don't, that's all good. Call's not over at this point. Try to get them to admit some kind of pain in their process, right? Sometimes people just aren't super willing to give that information up front. So you got to ease into it and just ask the question again in a different way. Okay, so in a perfect world, what could be better about your relevant process? So include, hey, your lead generation process. And so if they aren't giving anything up at this point, try a very short, condensed pitch. That's kind of a last ditch effort, right? So if we're able to help you achieve specific result in time frame with our process, sounds like that's not even something you'd be interested in. So you just come out direct, tell them what your offer is. And oftentimes people respond to directness. And so they'll just say, hey, that's interesting, or no, it's not interesting. So at least you've kind of gone through that. And this usually gets some good responses from folks and gets them to open up a little bit more. So now you want to connect the pain that they've admitted to or offered up to business impact. So at this point, you built some rapport with the prospect. They're opening up. You're having an actual conversation, right? You might have already gotten hung up on. You might have already gotten some objections at this point. What you need to do now is just continue to gather information, right? So now you need to get them to relate their pain to that actual business impact, as I mentioned. You can't assume that they're going to be able to make that connection themselves. You've got to either make them feel it. You got to be very, very specific and explicit. Ideally, it feels visceral. So what I mean by that, like they feel it in their body. The way that if you were looking at somebody or having a conversation, they should be shifting around in their seat, feeling uncomfortable because what you're bringing up is actually giving them a reaction, right? If that's the case, you're on a really good path, right? Ultimately, this might feel uncomfortable, especially when you're first starting out, or if you're somebody who says, hey, I'm a nice person, I don't really like making people feel away. The reality is, like, your service is delivering on its promise, just assuming that. It's really your duty to help them solve it, right? So if they're in pain, just make sure that they're actually taking that action to get better themselves, better their business, get them closer to their goals, right? And nobody's really going to take action if they aren't feeling that pain. So why would you take medicine if you never had a headache in the first place, or maybe you just forgot you even had a headache, right? You got to remind them of that headache. You got to remind them of that pain that they're feeling. So we want to get them to think about what it's costing them in terms of quantifiable costs. So that's time, that's money, that's effort, that's ego, that's relationships. What is the cost of them not solving this problem? And try to do it without being too salesy, right? Do this with very basic, simple questions. Many of these are just less than 10 words, right? So, hey, can you tell me more about that? The key with these types of questions is acting genuinely interested. A good way to do that is just you inflect your voice up towards the end. It's a tone of curiosity, right? The next one here, why has that been a frustration to you? What would you do with that time if you had it? Specifically, if they said, oh, I don't have time to do this. Why does that matter to you? Then you can check their priority with a question like, is that pain important enough to fix? And when you say pain, you can just specifically relate it to what they've shared. And ultimately, this allows you to quantify it. So something could be painful, but it could be bottom of the priority list, right? You want to try to find a way to work it all the way up to the top so they want to take action as quickly as possible. And you do that by just continuing to ask these questions, continuing to follow up, and continuing to get more context into their situation. And then relating it back to how your actual product, your actual service solves that problem for them. Then let's wrap it up with a call to action or asking for a meeting, right? At this point, You've provided context on your offer. You've gathered some basic intelligence into their current situation and their main pain points. Now it's time to actually close into the meeting. Remember, you do not need to sell the entire deal here. You're calling them out of the blue. You probably only have 3-5 minutes. You want to try to keep them on as long as possible, but you don't need to belabor it. What I would suggest doing is just focusing your goal on trying to get them to take that next step, which is to just take a sales meeting with you or your team or your founder or your salesperson, right? So you will have plenty of time on that scheduled call to go in depth with your discovery. And then you can give them a full pitch if it makes sense and it's super relevant. That's why you want to just keep these calls super concise. You want to keep it direct. So to do this, tie back the next step to putting them into the position to actually solve their problem, right? Be prescriptive. That's the key here. Be a consultant like a doctor, right? Because you've shared pain 1, pain 2, and pain 3 with me, and it's causing this specific impact, the best next step for you is to book in a call with me or whoever the salesperson is, right? And on that call, they'll be able to go more in depth on your current situation, what's currently working for you, what isn't, and how we could potentially help you solve that pain and get you outcome. What works? We have some time available Tuesday, time 1, or Wednesday, time 2. Be very prescriptive. Give them 2 options to choose from in terms of time. If they say no, that doesn't work, provide something else, and then ask again. Then book it in. Easy as that. That said, that's the 5-step framework that I use to book meetings with cold calls. You can use this framework and apply it to your own industry so you can book meetings as soon as today. Now, if you'd like my personal help creating your own go-to-market strategy, which includes cold calling, cold email, outbound, inbound, outbound, so you can generate more B2B revenue, then go to my website, levergrowth.io, and book a call with me. I'll ask you a few questions about your current situation. If you're a good fit, then we'll actually talk next steps and how to get started. But that's it for this video. Hope you got some value in it. I'll chat to you in the next one. Peace.